Okay. Then Mrs. Pumphrey started sending in brandy. At the time, Mr. Harriet was not able to believe that Mrs. Pumphrey actually wanted them to give brandy to Tricky. They shared it amongst themselves. Some days, Mr. Harriet used to feel very happy as he would start his day with extra eggs sent by the lady. Then he would have a few glasses of wine in the afternoon, as again we can say that Mrs. Pumphrey was sending in those wine bottles for the dog, and this all benefit is taken, or the advantage is taken by the doctor. Okay, so what he is doing, he would have a few glasses of wine in the afternoon and then ending the day with brandy in the evening. Because of all the things that were being sent for Tricky, Mr. Harriet was really tempted to keep him as a permanent guest at the surgery. He really wanted that Tricky should stay with them forever. But then he realized that Mrs. Pumphrey, who was like a mother to Tricky, was really suffering and really wanted Tricky to come back soon. After 15 days, Tricky was ready to go back home, and Mr. Harriet called up Mrs. Pumphrey to come to pick him up. Within a few minutes, a long black car came outside. When Shuffle opened the door, Mrs. Pumphrey was sitting inside, really nervous as well as excited. She was asking with a nervousness in her voice that was Tricky really better or not? And to which the doctor replied very positively. Then Mr. Harriet went inside to get Tricky. When Mr. Harriet went to the garden behind the house, he saw all the dogs moving around in the garden, and Tricky was sitting between them. He had recovered wonderfully in 2 weeks. He was looking much healthier, playing with the other dogs, and his chest was touching the ground. See the improvement in the dog. He had become a good muscular dog within 2 weeks. When Mr. Harriet took Tricky to the front of the house, he saw that the Shuffle was still holding the door of the car, and as soon as Tricky saw his mother-like mistress, he was overjoyed. He ran away and jumped into the lap of Mrs. Pumphrey and started licking her face, barking in excitement. While all this was happening, the Shuffle and Mr. Harriet got all his stuff out to the car, which had not been used during the treatment in the last 14 days. When Mrs. Pumphrey was leaving, she leaned out of the window and said to Mr. Harriet with tears of joy in her eyes that she could not thank him enough for what he had done. She was not having words to express that feeling of gratitude. And this is what we can say, we can call a triumph of surgery. Meant that the treatment that was given to Tricky had been successful. Okay, so it was not a surgery, but it was a proper treatment given to the dog, which led to the success, which improved the condition, the state of the dog. Okay, at the beginning we have seen what was the situation, how the dog was suffering. Okay, and it was only because of the over pampering and the overfeeding. So here the story gives us a moral that we should only give and we should only take. Both ways we should think. that whenever we are giving or whenever we are getting, we should take only the minimum required things. Over pampering and overfeeding, excess of anything is bad. Okay, so this was the very interesting story about Tricky, a dog. Thank you so much.